You're listening to the Wilmac Wire, the podcast that's designed to give you a glimpse into a growing SaaS company, specifically in the realm of customer interaction technology. From customer experience to data management, we'll talk about it here. Thank you for tuning in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Wilmac Wire. My name is Emily Miller, your host from Wilmac Technologies, and today I'm joined by two guests. The first you have recognized, and I'm sure you've heard from previous episodes, and he is Steve McDonnell, President and CEO of Wilmac Technologies. So besides Steve and I on the Wilmac side, we were really lucky to get to talk to another analyst. We've been having some great conversations with analysts lately, and I'm hoping to keep up that trend. But today's conversation is with Ian Jacobs, the VP and Lead Analyst at Opus Research. Now, Ian's analyst role revolves heavily around conversational AI. So we have a great conversation around that, around his involvement in that, but we also touch a bit on generative AI and agentic AI. Beyond that, Ian likes to talk about AI's impact on people. So it kind of all keeps coming back to that people point. We also covered how big players are evolving in that market when it comes to CX and the trajectory of interactions, and also the value of call recording data, that data layer that continues to be a theme in our conversations. The data that people have to retain for years for compliance, how are they using that for their AI? Is it a step up from those that don't have that data layer to pull from? So great conversation. Like I said, I'm going to toss it over now to the interview with Ian Jacobs. Thanks so much for tuning in. All right, thank you for tuning in to the Wilmac Wire. I am joined today by two awesome guests. First is someone you might recognize, Steve McDonnell, President and CEO of Wilmac Technologies, joining me again on the Wilmac Wire. Thanks for joining, Steve.
Happy to be excited.
And our guest of honor is what I'll call it, is Ian Jacobs, VP and Lead Analyst at Opus Research. And just to give our audience some context, Ian is a regular speaker, writer, and thought leader in the contact center and CX space. And in his role at Opus Research, he guides research in conversational AI and conversation analytics. Beyond that, he has 20 plus years of industry experience, including a decade at Forrester and a leadership role at Genesis, among many other esteemed roles. So Ian, thanks for joining us on the Wilmac Wire today.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. All right, we're going to jump right into things, Ian, kind of give our audience some more context. So you worked at a few different research firms, like I mentioned, Forrester being one of them, now currently at Opus Research. But you also worked at Genesis, who is a big CCaaS player. What made you come back to the analyst world?
Well, there's the standard answer of, well, I wanted to be a doer rather than a talker, and then I found all the problems in working in the vendor world. But honestly, it was an interesting time when I rejoined the ranks of the analyst world. It was like, I don't know, about 11 years ago. And we were starting to see the early seeds of conversational AI becoming something more than a novelty. I mean, I've been covering chatbots and talking about it since I went back and found a presentation I gave in like 2007 when I was an analyst about chatbots. So it's not like it's new, but they were frustrating novelties. And we started to see some real world impacts around that time. Obviously, the technology was, like Tinker Toys compared to what we have today. But there was that. And then the other thing that was going on back then was we were really starting to think about how the human part of contact center and customer service was being ill-served by the organizational structures and incentives and so on that had been set up. I don't think we've fixed that problem. 11 years later, it's still a big issue. But there was like the first hint that CEOs were going to talk about CX as being a core value prop for the brand, right? And that then had to filter down to the contact center, which then had to filter down to how you hired, recruited, trained, and tried to retain employees in the contact center. So I was oddly drawn back to look at the humans and the AI at the same time, like both parts of it. We wouldn't have even called it AI at that point, right? We would have just called it automation or chatbots. But like both of those issues at the same time were what was most interesting to me.
Yeah, that's great. And I was looking at your LinkedIn profile before we hopped on here, and I really liked in your bio how one of like your core things that you said you like to work on is exploring how AI impacts people. So it kind of plays into that human AI part, really aligns well with what you were just sharing. And staying in that kind of conversation of being an analyst, what does your job as an analyst actually look like now?
In some ways, it's way more fun than it used to be. And in some ways, it's under more strain. There's this idea out there that the combination of the LLMs and the tools and the wrappers around them that folks in enterprises have access to make analysts obsolete, as well as like massive peer review sites, right? And that's where people want to get the truth from. So there's that kind of weighing on us, but overall it's more fun. As you mentioned, Opus is looked at conversational technologies, and it's looked at conversational technologies for a couple of decades. The world's just kind of caught up with us. So people come and look at us as kind of the graybeards in the space, right? Like the people who've been around a long time looking at this technology and seeing the changes, seeing how people are reacting to it. So that part of it is a lot of fun. And I am getting to think about a whole lot of cool things. I just did a press interview earlier today about what they called machine customers, i.e. humans having personal AI agents, consumers, going out and interacting with brands, potentially with the AI agents from brands in a bot-to-bot conversation, right? Like it's,
Oh my gosh.
who wouldn't love that? It's fun to think about that and what all the problems are and what needs to happen to make that a reality and all of the cool things that you could do if you could get it to actually work, right? So I think the aperture of what we get to cover has expanded wildly. The one thing that hasn't changed is, as you mentioned, Emily, is my focus on people. I mean, I've been, in my career as an analyst, I've looked at the BPO space. I still look at the BPO space. I looked at the workforce optimization, workforce engagement world. I still look at that. It's just now it's how AI is changing all of those things. But it's still a people focus, and that's what makes me happy. I mean, technology, I don't write about vacuum cleaners, but I could. It's technology, right? But people are interesting to me. People are fascinating. So that's what my job looks like, is trying to ground everything back into the human's lived experience in this world.
Yeah, and I think that aligns, Steve, well with kind of what we work towards at Wilmac. Like, yes, we're selling technology, we're supporting technology, but the goal of that technology is to enrich the people the people that interact with it. So I just wanted to check in, Steve, before we move on to the next section. Do you have anything to add or a question to ask Ian?
Yeah, no, this is great, Ian. Great insight and great background. We obviously, I would consider kind of playing that WFO or WEM space more than the other spaces, but we've had our interactions certainly with conversational AI vendors, and I feel like the word and phrase is tossed around constantly, and it depends what type of customer you're talking to, whether they're even today, how seriously they take it. And then you get these the classic WFO vendors, or now even the CCAS vendors, the Verents, the NICE, the 5.9s, trying to figure out how they play in that world. So it's definitely interesting to hear what you're saying. I think it's also awesome to take it back to the people. That is very unique, I think, to, no matter what happens, no matter how good this technology gets, it's still frustrating to call into a contact center when you're already angry about some issue you're having. So having an actual bot do it for you, a personalized consumer bot, is quite an interesting theory, and I guess that's where we're going. But the bot to bot conversation, so the humans don't have to worry about it, and they'll just figure it out. I find that interesting and something I haven't dove in or learned about much.
Uh, I am looking forward to the day where I have some universal digital version of Ian that can go out in the world and act on my behalf. But for today, in the near term, I think what we're going to see is very specific use cases. So something will go and cancel your subscription. It may make a dinner reservation at a restaurant for you, but it's not going to be able to be the digital Steven and go do everything for quite a long time. We don't even know how to train the digital Steven, right? Like, we don't have a way to have it follow you down a supermarket aisle when you pick up a box of pasta, look at it, put it back on the shelf, and pick up a different one and take that home.
Yeah.
That's exactly the behavior that you want it to be able to mimic, right? I mean, we don't even know how to get to that yet. But these specific use cases, right? Like, I have a service right now that I pay for that scans my credit card bills and tells me when there's recurring payments, which are subscriptions that I may have forgotten that I wanted. And then they offer the ability to have a bot version go and cancel that subscription, so I don't need to do it. Like, that's
really?
kind of the, yeah.
Oh, so that's pretty.
Right. So that's the state we're in today, but you can definitely see directionally where we're moving.
Yeah.
And right now, that bot acting on my behalf may have to deal with a human, or it may have to deal with the company's bot. And right now, we don't really have all the nuances worked out, but we'll get there.
We'll get there, yeah. All right, yeah, that was interesting. I've never heard of that either. Gotta dig into that more. Okay, I'm just gonna skip ahead one section in our brief, Ian, and jump into the fact that NICE recently announced that it's acquiring Cognigy. You shared on LinkedIn that this isn't just a tech consolidation story, but a big step towards thinking how AI agents and human agents work together. Can you expand on that more?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, you would look at the world in buckets if you were an analyst, because that's what you do. You put these vendors over here and these vendors over here. You know, Stephen, you talked about the WFO vendors and the CCAS vendors, right? We think about that. We've thought about conversational AI vendors, the people that have the conversations with customers automated. And we thought about the conversation analytics vendors, who are the people who understand conversations. So speech analytics, desktop analytics, all of those kinds of things. And we thought about them as two separate worlds. But you really have to start to think about them as one world, because if you're having the conversation, you need to be smart enough to understand the conversation. And if you're smart enough to understand the conversation, aren't you smart enough to then have the conversation? The problem has been that we've been thinking about one as AI outbound, right? The conversational piece, and one as AI tools to understand the human-to-human conversations. But really, we need to understand the human-to-bot conversations, and as we were just talking about, potentially the bot-to-bot conversations in the same set of data that we're looking at the human-to-human conversations, because CX actually is a thing. And you actually do want to understand from the customer's perspective what an interaction looked and felt like. That interaction may start with AI and then escalate to a human. That's one conversation. So we need to start to think about how to bring all that together, and then to shift to a world that you guys understand, right? Like, this is the same kind of thing where you're looking at old call recordings, right? Like, right now, we're looking at that to drive behavior change in the human agents at best, right? There's the compliance aspect, which means it's sitting somewhere if you need it. But if you're actively using it, you're using it for quality purposes. You're incorporating, if you're really smart, snippets from some of those calls in your training programs and so on, right? But that's human to human. We need to start to think about the human to bot and bot to bot as being part of that same data corpus that we can use for training and service process design and all of that sort of stuff. So NICE and Cognigy points in that direction, right? Where NICE brings the analytics piece, as well as obviously the core infrastructure, the routing stuff, to bear. And Cognigy brings all of the interaction piece, the AI interaction piece, and the data that goes along with it, and analytics that's mostly designed to understand how that bot is performing, i.e., is it giving the right answers, rather than necessarily the experiential part of it, where the NICE technology comes into play. They're not the only ones going down that route. They just happen to be the combination of kind of one of the, maybe the biggest in the CCAS space, and probably the leading name in the conversational AI world. But again, there are a lot of other vendor combinations that are looking like they're going down the same route.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, Ian, and thanks for digging into that. Now, I know, Steve, that's kind of been a conversation around the office this week. Is a NICE acquiring Cognigy. Do you have anything to add to what Ian said?
No, yeah, I think it's interesting and it's great to get Ian's perspective kind of from the technology side. With the new CEO of NICE, obviously he's made it clear he's gonna make some. He's a different beast than Barack was, and he is gonna be making some moves quickly. I mean, it's the partnerships, and it seems, and I think I've heard some analysts say it, but reading between the lines here, it seems like he doesn't even want to stay in the contact center space. He's looking to move wherever interactions are happening, he's looking to go to.
Yeah, yes, I think that's probably true. I would also say that's not totally new, right? Like the WFM vendors thought that they should be able to do workforce planning for retail spaces and for back office. And there was always the notion that you have to break out of the contact center if you actually want service resolution, right? If you're an insurance company, there's the contact center that's interacting with the customer, but there's the claims processing people who are actually doing the work that then gets relayed to the contact center people to then relay that information to the consumer. That's all one service process. And so can you own all of that? Like, the notion has been there. I don't think there's been a company with as much cash as NICE has had to be able to throw at the problem, right? And that is, yes, the new CEO, Scott, is a very different beast, but it's also a legacy of the way that Barack managed the company to build up that giant cash reserve so that they actually have the wherewithal to go do these things.
Yeah, they're obviously set up great to do it. And then I'm trying to figure out, and it'd be great to get your viewpoint, Five9, who we're a partner of, and we've been a partner. I would say our A partner is NICE. We've been partners with them for 30 years. We're just super close with them. But we do a lot with Five9, and if you talked to our frontline employees, they love working with Five9. They absolutely adore them. And you go to their events, and it seemed like they were growing. Their revenue was growing. They were winning some big deals. But then I felt like the past 6 months, all you hear is, the stock's down, they're having layoffs, executives are leaving. So and then, Genesis, which I know you know, is the other powerhouse I would put up right there with NICE. I don't know if they're still trying to IPO or not, but do these guys have kind of the power, not just cash, but, the resources and stuff to keep up with NICE when they start making these types of acquisitions? And I'm sure it's got to be on their roadmap to start looking into these types of acquisitions.
Well, so Five9 already made, a conversational AI acquisition of Inference and has been using that to power its own effort. So they were actually earlier, right? They were maybe one of the companies that showed NICE that it was an actual gap, which is kind of a weird, it's kind of an innovator's dilemma. Now you're being out-innovated by the people who saw what you did.
Yeah.
Maybe. Without actually talking about the specific vendors, I will say that it is possible, leaning into likely, that this sort of starts a mini arms race.
Yeah.
There are a lot of conversational AI vendors that were in the revenue range of where Cognigy was that wouldn't demand quite that number of multiples of revenue for an acquisition, right? So there's a lot out there that can be bought. And I think you will see a lot of those those companies starting to get snapped up. And I'm sure that the conversational AI vendors, especially the founders, are starting to think, okay, we always knew that an exit was where we needed to go. Is now the time? How do we make that happen? Right. So from that perspective, I think you're going to see this as a trigger event for sure.
Interesting. And Ian, did you imagine 20 years ago when you started as an analyst that you'd be having these types of conversations too with where CX is going and the interaction piece of it? It's kind of mind blowing.
Well, no, obviously I didn't know where it was going to go, but
Yeah.
I mean that back then it was always like, how do you make companies treat their agents better, given that they're the face of the company to
Mhm.
customers, and how do you make that work when you actually have 5 BPO partners across 4 countries, and so we haven't gotten rid of that problem. We've just kind of layered new CX problems on top of that. I mean, we still have those same issues that
Right.
we've had. So there's always work to be done, which is good.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
For
Keeps your
me,
job exciting. It
it's
keeps
good
our
for,
jobs, everyone's jobs exciting for
right.
sure.
It's good for our jobs. Like,
To, to that point, Ian, it's unbelievable from my perspective. I spent most of my adult life in New York, Boston, um, and most of Wilmac's customer base, we're headquartered in Rochester, New York, but majority of our customer base, 95%, is outside of Western New York. So I came back here when I acquired the company, and we're really trying to get out and get some local customers. And it is interesting to see how some of these small to mid-sized contact centers treat their contact centers. To your point, these guys are the face for them, yet they're the lowest paying salaries they get. They are always trying to outsource for something cheaper. I see a lot, and I don't know if you see it or if you come down to that mid-tier kind of contact center, the 50 to 700 seat contact center. But a lot of them are still way behind in technology. They wouldn't even be able to jump into conversational AI because they're still on-prem on legacy Mitel and whatnot. So I've been surprised the past year to see a gap still in some contact centers, not quite as far along in the technology journey as I thought they'd be.
I think you'd be surprised at how true that is even in the very large contact centers. Contact centers still are inherently conservative, right? A lot of the new, let's talk about the new sort of generative AI and agentic AI tools that are really focused on, like, here's one giant prompt box and you can build everything, right? Like that sort of, we are so bought into the future of this that we're going to even get rid of like a design canvas to design out a workflow. You don't need that. You just tell the bot what to do. You tell it its personality. You give it access to data. You give it its guardrails, and off it goes and does it. That works if you're like a $30 million e-commerce company, and you're excited about the future and you haven't built a huge amount of infrastructure, but you're probably going to get to 300 million in a couple of years because that's the way those things go. But if you're like a $4 billion company with 15 outsourcing partners, and you've got so much built infrastructure and you've got so much process created on top of process, it's really hard to buy into a lot of the newest, latest, and greatest. And that's why you see a lot of the companies like NICE taking a much more pragmatic approach, and Cognigy as well. Like, they know what the future is. They lay it out. They have tools if you want to be that $30 million e-commerce company, but 95% of the customers are going to take the incremental steps where you still have a design canvas to lay out the whole process, and you can even lock down the process that your security and risk people have blessed, and you're not going to touch that. But if the customer says this, then it kicks off some agentic process, and then there's agentic dialogue, i.e. generative AI. The bot can say what it wants to say within the constraints that are built for it, right? It's that sort of incrementalism. And it's because the differences between the really small contact centers and the really big contact centers are certainly ones of scale, but a lot of the problems are actually kind of the same underneath the covers.
Makes
It makes sense for sure. And I'm curious and want to build on your experience, Ian, in conversational AI, but what are some use cases that, for conversational AI that are working today for the organizations that you're advising?
Yeah, so there's kind of two different approaches that brands take. One is let's look at all of the high volume, low complexity type of interactions that we get, and let's automate those. So that's like the password reset. If you're shipping any physical good, the Wismo, where's my order kind of inquiries, right?
Hmm.
Like those are fairly straightforward. Um, there's a set process that's easy to follow. Again, it's locked down. It doesn't really change very much. Where's my order? It literally just looks in some back-end system and spits out the status back to the customer. Password reset follows the same set of steps. Interestingly, it doesn't even matter whether you're in healthcare or financial services or retail. Password reset is password reset. So the brands that are looking at that, and those things are easy to automate, often they're used as a proof of concept to show others more skeptical within the organization that, hey, this stuff works, right? The wins aren't actually necessarily that great because these aren't high value interactions that you're automating. The second camp is like, let's look at things that are not insanely complex, but are actually slightly more high value, the things that are actual real pain points to the business. So I think of some of the conversational AI companies that really specialize in the healthcare, particularly like the multi-site healthcare. So you're a chain of 50 dentist offices or 120 doctor offices in a consortium, right? And what is the biggest problem that's a time suck for those things? Appointments, scheduling, and rescheduling, right?
Hmm.
It's less simple because you're actually navigating a human's calendar versus the organization's calendar and looking at skills, and you're also looking at insurance and all of that kind of stuff. But it's a real drain on the organization to have humans do that when they could be giving direct patient care to the people who are in the office with them. And so you're seeing those brands kind of start there, where
Hmm.
it's medium complexity, medium volume, but high value. We're not really seeing any brands saying like the first place we're going to start is like the very high complexity, very low volume kind of thing that
Right.
requires human judgment, human emotion, human trust, and all of that kind of stuff. But those other two camps are where we're seeing really successful use cases. And the appointment rescheduling is not just a healthcare thing. You can think of that of any kind of industry that has truck rolls, right?
Hmm.
Cable installation, utilities, appliance repair, right? So these are more generalized use cases that apply across lots of different industries. But that's where we're seeing really kind of quick to quick-ish wins for brands.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I was just thinking about I have to schedule a tire appointment, and like the last time I did that, I remember it was through a service like that. So definitely
Exactly.
a quick win. Yeah.
Tire repair is exactly the kind of
Hmm.
business that this is, a rich opportunity for. Muffler replacement is another. Like
Right.
they want to have as minimal a front office as possible because they want to be paying to do the actual work that customers need for them, right?
Hmm.
So why not like have somebody interact with their bot to do the scheduling as long as they have the right people in place to do the repair that you need,
Right.
right? That's
Yeah.
what the business is built on.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Yeah. And before we wrap up, I wanted to ask kind of one other question, and you alluded to it originally when we were talking about the acquisition, but call recordings. That's kind of the realm that Wilmac operates in.
Yeah.
And in most cases, we're working with organizations that have to retain those call recordings for a significant period of time. So they're sitting on what we like to call a gold mine of interaction data. Um, how does that kind of data support AI training and CX improvement,
Yeah, yeah.
especially when it comes to chatbots and conversational AI and kind of what we've been talking about?
yeah, those recordings aren't just for auditors. I mean, it's your
Right.
customers telling you exactly how they speak, like literally what words they say, what they care about, and where they get stuck, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you want AI that actually connects with people, you got to train it on the same language that your customers use, right? You need
Mm-hmm.
to actually identify the way the customers talk and not the way that your brand talks about its products, its services, its processes. You need to mirror that back to them, literally
Mm-hmm.
the words that they say. So that's just like the most basic level of training. And honestly, that's the same rule that applies to human agents too, right? Speak like your customers, not like a script. I mean, it's just taking the idea that we would like human contact centers have and apply it to AI. So I actually think those recordings should also be used in human to human training. Like, why are you
Mm-hmm.
saying that? Why don't you say just the way the customers talk about a thing? So that's kind of one obvious way that you should be pulling value out of those recordings. The other is the way that your brand is perceived changes over time. And if you've actually got a corpus with legacy recordings, you can actually figure out, like, from a marketing perspective, what brand perception is and where you
Mm-hmm.
want it to go. And you can start to do experiments and pull the data from the call recordings and see if it changes the type of interactions you have with customers. The final way is revenue generation, because who doesn't want those old recordings to actually start to become, you called it a gold mine, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean like literally not just a gold mine of information that you can mine, but opportunities to be like, sometimes the best way we can serve a customer is to sell them the right thing in the first place, right? So let's actually start to figure out where customers are buying product or service X when we should actually have our sales focused, whether it's online, whether it's B2B, human sales, outside, inside, doesn't matter, have them focused on selling product X, because that actually solves the problem. And oh, by the way, would reduce this whole body of inbound contact that we now have to pay for. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
giving the customers what they actually need and reducing our costs in the contact center at the same time. So
Mm-hmm.
those are like three quick ways that I
Yeah.
think, that the I don't know what you called it, but the pile of old dusty call recordings that you got sitting somewhere, like where that should be actively used and should not be gathering dust.
I think it's ironic that you just said the old dusty recordings, because like we've been in situations where we've walked in and like there's dust on like wherever the recordings are, and you gotta like blow it off to like
Yeah.
the movies.
Yeah, we used to get, not so much anymore, but we used to get in situations, especially with very like banks and insurance companies that need to dig up these recordings from 15 years ago that are still sitting on old nice mirrors and
Right,
like
right.
Mm-hmm.
actual physical stuff. But yeah, I find it interesting your points, and it's always been for us up until 3-4 years ago. It's been a compliance play, and all we focused on for the most part. So it's our fault too. We were focusing on banks, energy companies, insurance. We knew they had retention policies, and that made sense. But all they cared about was just keep this in a safe spot, make it accessible for us. That's all we want. Get it out of whatever vendor they had it in, and make sure they have it safe. And now all of a sudden, everyone's like, "Can you get it up to our generative AI?"
Yeah,
But to your point, they could have been using this for training purposes all along.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
they have just, now that it's the next great thing, the generative AI,
Well,
they're finally doing it.
wait till they start asking about the agentic AI, because I
Yeah.
mentioned where customers get stuck.
Yeah.
We can also identify where agents not get stuck, but spend a lot of time, right,
Mm-hmm.
where pauses happen, where somebody gets put on hold. Why? So that the agent can go do something. Well, what if the agent could continue to talk to the customer while some agentic AI did that? You've now identified where your agentic efforts, to go back to the use case question, and well, you're starting to identify those use cases from the calls. Like, wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
it be better if there weren't three holds on that call? Of course there are. We all know that improves CX, right? So keep the
Right.
agent talking to the customer, let the agentic system go off and change the address in the background. Don't make the agent do
Interesting.
that kind of thing, right? So that's
Yeah.
something else that you can find. And it doesn't matter whether the call recordings are new or old for that.
Mhm.
Just finding the pain points in the processes that you've designed to help figure out where to insert technology to improve those processes, both from the operational and cost standpoint of the brand and the experiential viewpoint of the customer.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Ian, appreciate you hopping on.
No
Our,
problem.
our recording platform isn't loving on us today, but this conversation's great. Okay. We'll start to wrap up the episode now. So, Ian, I just have two more quick questions for you. You've been in this industry for a while. What keeps it interesting for you? And then on top of that, are there any exciting projects that you're working on coming up that you'd like to share about?
Well, those are related questions, and I think I already gave the answer. It's people. Like,
Yeah.
as much as I sounded like I was excited about technology, I'm not a person who loves technology by nature. I like people. So I like looking at the impact of people, which is why I'm starting to think about how you make the agents' jobs easier and so on. And one of the things that I'm looking at going forward is, well, so I have a report coming out probably early next week about the future of work, i.e. the future of work in a contact center. That's what I really mean. And how people think about AI as your colleague, whatever, a team member, but also like what new roles are going to pop up in contact centers to help work with AI and so on. But I'm also looking at the BPO world and the impact of AI on the BPOs and the outsourcers. And I think that I have research that I've just started, so it'll be probably a month or two before we publish anything on that. But one of the things that is what's keeping it exciting is that there's a lot of counterintuitive truth out there. And one I'm starting to discover is that as the BPOs start to deploy AI in their programs with the brands, right, that they're doing service for, they're starting to find that the predictions that like, oh, if we have AI handling 50% of the interactions, we're going to reduce our headcount by 50% isn't true at all, because brands are saying, oh, well, if I can take a bit of the cost savings, take 10% of the savings and apply the other 40% to expanding my service from 5 days a week, 8 hours a day to 24/7. Or I can now add chat as well as voice, or I can serve customers in Spanish, French, and German as well as in English. I'm going to do that, and I still save 10%. Right. So I hadn't predicted that. It's fascinating to me that like the way that people are thinking about the people who drive the customer experience for them is fascinating. So that's what I'm working on, and it happens to be the thing that's keeping me excited.
Yeah, I love that. And Ian, if any of our listeners are interested in, for example, getting that report, your report on the future of work, where would they find that?
opusresearch.net. That
Love
is
that.
the Opus Research website. You can also find me on LinkedIn and just ping me directly.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks. Steve, any final questions or thoughts for Ian?
No, thank you so much, Ian. Really appreciate it. I know our little recording app was a little shaky, so appreciate the patience.
Of course.
And I second what you're saying. I find it on LinkedIn and social media, the very extreme people want to make it seem like AI is going to wipe out the contact centers and all the people are going to be done. But when you talk to actually people in the industry, no one is saying that at all. They're saying it's going to just make the contact center that much more efficient by doing this.
Yep.
So great insights, and really appreciate it, Ian.
Happy to join.
All right. Thanks to our listeners for joining this episode of the Wilmac Wire. Ian, Steve, thanks for joining me today. Like Ian mentioned, for our listeners, you can connect with Ian on LinkedIn under Ian Jacobs, and you can find his work on opusresearch.net. So thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wilmac Wire. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or visiting our website at www.wilmactech.com. You can also watch the full video recordings of every episode on our YouTube channel. Thank you for being a part of our community, and again, thank you for listening to the Wilmac Wire.